Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast. I'm Eva Monheim.
And I'm Hal Rosner. We are both certified arborists through the International Society of Arboriculture. The purpose of our podcast is to encourage tree planting and proper tree care for our urban forests, which include neighborhoods, parks, and other open spaces.
We will also cover a myriad of tree topics, including the important role trees play in relationship to the climate crisis. Thank you for joining us.
Verdant Earth Educators provides dynamic in-person training and online learning opportunities for environmental and horticultural businesses. Owned by ISA Certified Arborists and former university faculty, the Verdant Earth Educator team provides consultations on tree care and recommends climate-resilient opportunities for your valued green spaces. Verdant Earth Educators is all about seeding knowledge for success. Find Verdant Earth Educators at verdanteartheducators.com.
Monheim Microphones designs and handcrafts top-tier studio microphones and preamps right here in the United States in Hollywood, California. Their incredible line of innovative microphones and designs are used around the world by everyone from podcasters to top-charting record producers and singers. Monheim Microphones, unparalleled excellence. MonheimMicrophones.com. The Urban Wood Network gives people strength in numbers and a collective voice to showcase the growing environmental impact of an industry like urban wood utilization. This is really critical in a world where resource recovery and carbon storage benefits can go a long way to meet the needs of climate sustainability goals of cities, businesses, and consumers. Contact us at urbanwoodnetwork.org. This podcast is being recorded on January 17th, 2025. Jehane Samaha is the National Urban Nursery Specialist with the U.S. Forest Service. She develops trainings and networking for both urban foresters and nursery growers to improve tree stock quality, enhance connectivity in the urban nursery pipeline, and promotes climate-adaptive genetics for urban trees. Jehane is based in Philadelphia, serves on the board of University City Green, and previously worked at the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society and the Morris Arboretum. She is an ISA Certified Arborist through the International Society of Arboriculture and completed a master's thesis at University of British Columbia on street tree species selection. Welcome to the Plant a Trillion Trees podcast, Jehane. We're delighted that you could be with us today.
Really happy to be here. Thanks so much for having me.
You know, we always like to ask our guests how they got to where they are today. Some people come in a very direct way. Other people come in a circuitous way. And we would like to hear about your journey and for people to understand that when you are working for the USDA or the U.S. Forest Service, it takes a lot to get there. It takes a lot to get there. And a lot of people don't understand that.
Circuitous is definitely how it felt the whole way that I was on the path. That I would say that this position at the Forest Service as Urban Nursery Specialist just felt like a magic job for me because it kind of combined and coalesced that whole circuitous loop-to-loop path. And I was like, oh, wait, this is where I'm supposed to be. You know, I did environmental science in college, which really meant more geology than anything. And I didn't even have the opportunity to take classes about plants, but was doing field ecology research in the summers, going up to mountaintops and identifying tiny little flowers. After college, I had experience at the Arnold Arboretum, which was pretty life-changing for me to be a horticulture intern on the grounds there. So I got my first pruning experience. I learned what a curator was of an arboretum. I learned to graft. I learned to mow a lawn, things I had never done before as a liberal arts student. And that really, I knew that I didn't just want to be in the wilderness somewhere with plants. I knew that I wanted to be interacting with people and really like sharing that. And working in public gardens gave me that perspective and that opportunity. I kept on at the Arboretum after my internship and did climate change research for a Harvard professor that was working out of there. And for her lab, Lizzie Wolkowicz, I was propagating plants, collecting seed from latitudes all the way from Massachusetts all the way up through Montreal and bringing them back to Massachusetts for a common garden experiment. And that just got me so happy being in the greenhouse with those baby trees and kind of sparked something in me. And I was also teaching a lot at that time, volunteers. We started a citizen science program to track phenology in the Arboretum. So, teaching hundreds of volunteers how to look closely at a bud and how it opens in the springtime. So kind of sharing that communication and people aspect. But I followed the baby trees aspect and moved to Philadelphia and worked at the Morris Arboretum as a propagation intern for a year. And that exposed me to a whole other world of public horticulture in this area and made me feel like, wow, Philadelphia is my home and I really want to stay here. And I remember asking some people at the Arboretum, like, so what's up with like urban forestry? Do you all know what that is? I remember asking those kind of questions and people being like, we don't really know, but, seems cool. And I was also hearing people out at the Arboretum saying things like, that tree over there, that filbert, that corylus, that's a really tough tree. And that would be a great small street tree, but funny that nobody knows about it and no nurseries are growing it. So that was starting to spark a lot of questions for me about that relationship between these kinds of fancy plants in public gardens and then what was actually out on the streetscape for people to enjoy. And why was there a disconnect there in terms of information and knowledge and also nursery supply? So that's what I went to grad school to think about. And I across the country. I went to the University of British Columbia, and my advisor there, Cecil Kananendijk, was really excited that I was bringing that public gardens perspective to urban forestry and just encouraged me, which was really unique, I think, that he was open to something so interdisciplinary. But I really looked at street tree species selection and how practitioners were making those decisions for my thesis. And I was particularly curious about that public garden question, like what are the weird trees and why aren't we using more of them? And then I worked in Philadelphia for 3.5 years with the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, actually doing those planting decisions. I was the tree geek on staff who was looking at the nursery list and choosing where trees are going, but also getting to do so much teaching with tree tender volunteers. And I love that. And at the same time, I was feeling pretty frustrated trying to choose trees for Philadelphia because we need to be bringing Southern species into Philadelphia. And we love the nursery that supplies the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, Schichtel's nursery, but they are in upstate New York. So a lot of the Southern species aren't hardy for them to grow for Philly. So I was calling nurseries in Georgia. I was Googling all around. And it was really hard to find, especially a producer that would do the large bare root trees that volunteer program is planting. Those bare roots are great for volunteers. They're 30 pounds instead of 300 pounds. You can lift them with one hand, even though they're 1.5 inch caliper and 15 feet tall. So a lot of suppliers were like, wait, you want what? And you want them in these strange native Southern species. And that just wasn't a demand that they were hearing much. And that was pretty hard for them to commit to working on. So with all those questions in mind, I was trying to brainstorm, like, how can we make change in the nursery system? And how can I, as one staff person at a nonprofit, have any influence on that problem? And then this job comes up at the Forest Service called Urban Nursery Specialist, and it literally is giving me the platform to talk to people about this issue on a national level and to learn a lot more about it for myself. Honestly, I think it feels like a luxury to be able to keep up with the scientific literature, to sit back and read and really understand and have that mandate to continue sharing that out with the people that I'm building a network with. So feeling really lucky and happy to be where I am at the end of that circuitous path.
I want to ask you, how long has that position been there? Because I think it's a new position, isn't it? Or a newer position?
It's a completely brand new position. It never existed before. So there was no stack of papers waiting on a desk for me. And there was honestly very little direction waiting for me. So I'm getting to vision it myself, create this position as I see it fitting the need that I'm talking with people about. I'm really asking a lot, like, what do nursery people need? What do urban foresters need? And how can I bridge that gap?
Hal and I have, because we're older in the industry, obviously, and the types of jobs that were available to us early on were nothing like they are now. There's so many new jobs coming on that it's even hard to keep track of, the new Pennsylvania tree canopy person and the person who is going to be working in the city. And when you talk about urban forestry, I remember almost 30 years ago, when they were talking about, there was one person, Julianne Schieffer, who was the urban forester for southeastern PA. And she was one of the only people in the whole entire area that had a degree from Wisconsin in that program. And that was the only university that had that program. And, you think about how far we've come, and Hal will certainly agree with this, that it's just become front and center, urban forestry. And it wasn't 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so true. It seems like urban forestry has been able to become a unifying theme among a lot of different disciplines, and that can make urban forestry really hard to define. Like, can you be a city planner by training and be an urban forester? Can you be an arborist by training and be an urban forester? And I think the answer to a lot of those questions is yes, that there's space for so many different skill sets. Can you be a community organizer and be an urban forester? Absolutely, yes. Can you be a social worker and be an urban forester? Yeah. So I followed this kind of like plants and ecology and phenology and teaching route to get here. And at the same time, I see myself as like a science communicator. I've always done lots of journalism and illustration, and I see myself mixing disciplines with environmental history. And there's so much that comes into it.
Yeah, it's interesting. I almost wonder if the IRA money and it being funneled to cities has kind of elevated the term urban forestry, that people are thinking about it more in depth. And it's interesting also that International Society of Arboriculture has adopted a credential, right? And I'm not going to get the name correct, but it has to do with municipal forestry. And that's a great thing. I feel a inner shift myself, Jehane, with less of an arborist and more of a urban forester, that it just seems to be the more, for lack of a better term, benevolent. It's more universal.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the chance to, I think I was letting you know one way or another that, 2024, I saw Jehane speak 3 different times, 3 different locations, but that doesn't mean I was able to absorb everything you were talking about. I did want to give you an opportunity to talk about Ringer, RNGR, and let our audience know the mission of that website that is just chock full of information.
Yeah, absolutely. So Ringer is the team I was hired onto. It stands for Reforestation, Nurseries, and Genetic Resources. And as the first urban-focused person on that team, as we said, brand new position that never existed before, they were starting to get questions about urban forestry. And most teammates in that unit are working in different regions all around the country, different topics, but mostly in natural ecosystems, kind of like wildland reforestation after large disturbances like fires or timber harvests, making sure that there's nursery supply, like say from a large Forest Service nursery or from a state nursery, giving technical advice to those nurseries to make that all work. And that's one fraction at least of what people were doing. And then as the questions were piling in about urban related trees, that was like a whole new world. And they were like, okay, bald and burlap, huh? So the Ringer website, Reforestation Nurseries and Genetic Resources, has a lot of beautiful guidebooks that team has written over the year that are talking about how to run a container nursery from planning all the way through implementation, how to do a bare root nursery for hardwoods, how to run a nursery in the tropics and all the differences that come in tropical environments. There's also like a tribal nursery guidebook and a really great kind of authority to compile information and share it out in these USDA guidebook forms. And then the teammates are just really available, by email or to come out and visit a nursery and look at the water quality, look at what lighting system is being used, look at the layout of the nursery and the workflow, and talk about genetics and seed sourcing. So I'm excited to be a part of that team and really dial down into that technical information. And I also see my role, since it is this new role, as especially being a networking role, to be like, okay, urban foresters who never knew that those resources existed, here we go.
Right.
And also how to connect more closely with nurseries that might not understand the urban context and what they're looking for in terms of stock type or branching height or even like root quality. Urban foresters getting like really serious about root quality and making sure that nurseries understand that and can provide that.
And I have a question about that. Are you working with nurseries just that are governmental nurseries, or are you working with private nurseries?
So I think in my position, it's going to be mostly private nurseries, and that's very different from a lot of my teammates. So it's a new world.
I'll tell you something. I just came back from Mance. Were you at Mance at all?
I skipped Mance. I really should have gone, but I took the day off.
Okay, so when I go to Mance, I'm just like, these are all the nursery people. These are my people, And when I saw the little bare root trees, and I said to somebody, oh, these are perfect for Milwaukee. You can make the little forest out of these. And they were like, what? What's Milwaukee? And I go, oh my gosh, I got to tell you what it is. And then you have to look it up because you have all the ingredients to make a Milwaukee forest,
Yeah.
And they
don't know that that's the buzz in urban forestry.
They don't know about Milwaukee.
They could be marketing it that way and sharing this product with urban forestry. Yeah.
So that's the kind of thing that, when you go someplace, and I see, just from knowing you for a little while, that when you see something that's really different, I kind of see little sparks coming out of you and making the connection or seeing something that nobody sees yet, And I think that is really critical for where we're headed and how we can get to what we need for our urban forests. You have to think outside the box. And Hal and I always talk about this. Okay, well, where's something going to come from next? And I go, well, just, we don't know. It might not be invented yet. We just have to wait or look around or find it under a rock somewhere or, it's just that way.
I feel like someone needs to tell our listeners what Mance is.
Oh, sure.
Oh.
Go for it, Eva.
Oh, Mance is the Mid-Atlantic Nursery and Trade Association. And Mance is the largest show in the country for nursery people. But this year, this young person was there. He was videoing. First time ever he was there. He was blown away. He said, I can't believe there's over 900 vendors. It's usually held in Baltimore because it's kind of like a midway point. And when you go there, you have to have really comfortable shoes to go to see 900 booths and visit people that you want to see because you met them someplace else, and you have to look up the booths. I will honestly tell you, it is the most amazing show that you could ever go to. And I don't know, general public should go. I think the general public should see what these people do because if they saw what they did, they would appreciate things more. The amount of energy that goes into growing plants and selecting plants and breeding plants, and the breeders are there, and the people who have stories to tell about how that tree got from the back of a nursery during a drought. That was the only tree that survived. And then they decided, let's put it into, production. And the next thing, the stories about plants are just trees. It's just phenomenal.
Was that a paid endorsement, Eva? That was pretty passionate.
No, it's not paid endorsement, but I will honestly tell you that the Garden Communicators, which I belong to, goes every year, and we get to see the new products for the industry. And this year, Jehane, you would have loved it because they had a spray there that is made up of all microorganisms, no chemicals, no oils. You spray it on the plant and they eat all the harmful insects. It's like blown away. To me, it's like, that's gold. You get to see it for the first time.
On the heels of talking about organizations, I've been burning question, Jehane. Like with a couple of your presentations, you've laid out pretty clearly what nursery people need to be thinking about. But is there an umbrella professional organization similar to ISA? It used to be American Nurserymen Association. They seem to be gone. And I'm just wondering, does the nursery nationally, do they get together, people that own nurseries?
I am still getting a handle on that.
Yeah.
What are the key national organizations and which ones actually have what kind of membership that are relevant to this type of nursery I'm trying to target? Coming so strongly from the urban forestry world, I have a lot less exposure to like the larger scale industry side of nurseries. And I'm really still wrapping my head around it. I've had some meetings with like state landscape and nursery associations, and I feel like that's a really useful level for me to start at with my networking is state by state, because those state landscape and nursery association coordinators and board members are really tuned in to what actual nurseries in their states really need.
Right.
So I have a big spreadsheet of all 50 states that I'm trying to fill out with the contact names. And this is part of being new to a job too, is that there's a lot for me to learn and a lot of networking to do. And it's a big country, let me tell you. And the fact that my position is national, I do want to understand what's happening on that national level. But then there's infinite intricacy and ability for me to dial down. I can spend just as much time talking with, a city forester who's trying to start a new municipal nursery and get really intricate there with all their partnerships and all their plans. And then I can zoom all the way out to that big national picture. It's a lot.
Sure.
Do you think that you're going to also, in your role, do you think that when you talk to somebody like an urban forest nursery, do you think you're going to set like a model or standard for something like that? Do you think that you might be the one who will set the standard? Because there's always going to be someone who's going to be a pioneer. Hint that you're going to be. I'm thinking out loud here. Where if you see a really good model, can you replicate it? Mm-hmm. And can you suggest replicating it? Mm-hmm. Like if it works really good here in Philly, maybe they could do it in Baltimore, New York, Pittsburgh, wherever. And then you would be guaranteed to know that there's X amount of trees coming through the pipeline.
I guess I haven't really been thinking of it in terms of searching for a single model. I think I've been thinking of it as a menu of case studies to really understand what's working for people when it's working, and then be able to offer that to someone in a similar situation. And I am keeping track of what people are doing well so that I can hook people up for these mentoring relationships. And I see that as like an important part of the network building and to replicate what's already successful without everybody having to reinvent the wheel. I will say, for contract growing, which has been a big topic this first year, that was the first webinar I helped moderate. We brought in a researcher an urban forester from New York and a nursery person from Chicago region. And all three of them spoke about the importance of contract growing and how it's done from all those perspectives. And then I accumulated a dozen or so examples of contracts. And so I haven't created one standard model contract, but I'm able to send this packet of multiple options to people. I've sent it over 80, managers and city foresters around the country who have requested it. So I'm hoping that this will really spark some change. And, contract growing is hailed as a solution to issues of nursery quality and supply, to really understand that for the nursery person, they understand that they have a lot less risk if they're trying something new. If an urban forester says, will you grow this weird tree for me? And the nursery person says, well, nobody's been requesting that. How am I sure that I'll actually sell this? And if it's in a contract that it will be bought, then that gives some security. And also with the IRA funding coming through, there's a lot of concern out there that the nursery supply will be insufficient to meet the demand, and that there will be more competition among cities, and especially I feel like smaller municipalities that might not have as much buying power. I worry for them that they're going to come to their nurseries and everything's going to be sold out. So setting up a contract growing arrangement ensures that in 2 or 3 years, that supply is actually going to be there.
Well, that's how the organic farms do it. I mean, or the farms do. They sell these parcels to people so that they can be guaranteed X amount of money, and they know that their product's going to be sold before it's even grown. And that's a really good model. And I think that that's what you're talking about, a similar model, but for trees.
Yeah. Are you talking about CSAs, the community supported agriculture?
Yeah, CSAs. Yeah. You get your parcel every week or whatever it is, and that they know that stuff's not going to go to waste because it's going to a home that's already paid for their product up front.
Exactly.
So knowing that you like little used trees, Jehane, and we can get to that in a bit. Can you just walk our listeners through what that scenario might look like if a medium-sized middle-class suburb of a big city, or Philadelphia, Baltimore, Wilmington, Delaware, wanted to do a contract grow? What would that look like?
So I think, first of all, a lot of urban foresters, a lot of municipalities are almost informally doing this. It's just not written and signed.
Right.
But there's a lot of people with, 30-year relationships with their nursery person where they can have these honest conversations and say, this is what we want. This is what we're going to want in 2 years, what we're going to want in 3 years. I think, though, with kind of the changing of the guard and also the scaling up of urban forestry planting, it's not enough to rely on that in all cases. So it's about going to a nursery and saying hey, we want to have a mutually beneficial agreement where that you can count on us to come through and buy these trees. And we know that they're going to be there for us in your field and grown to the quality specifications that we want and the species that we're interested in. At the same time, because both of those groups going into that agreement might be a little bit squeamish about being fully locked in, because things change and shift. There's bad weather at the nursery, funding changes for urban forestry projects. And so how do you deal with that? How do you keep flexibility in a contract? And I think the speakers in our webinar about contract growing really did a great job with that, because they could build into the contract. So say this crop of 300 Amalink years was supposed to be 1.5 inch caliber. And they only grew to 1.25 inches. Instead of that buyer being contractually obligated to reject those, setting a price point difference to say okay, they're $15 less now per tree, or whatever the price point might be, because they're still beautiful trees and they're actually going to do great in that project, and they're pruned perfectly and they meet all the other specifications. So building in that to the contract, also building into the contract, inflation. So you're setting up this contract now, but you actually want those trees in 5 years. So you want to make sure for the nursery person that price that they're getting in 5 years is actually competitive with what the market is like at that time. What else in terms of flexibility? I guess a big thing that seems important to me with this is giving a formalized process for feedback about how trees do, because we really want to close the loop, not just have nurseries sending trees off to cities and then never have any feedback about how they do. We want cities to have a process to go back and say, like, okay, this was our percent mortality. These 5 were found to have girdling roots. And so it would be great if you could work on that for next time, or, here's in the contract, this is the refund amount for that, or whatever the terms may be, so that then it becomes just normal to give and receive that feedback. And rather than having to be about a problem per se, to give the good and bad feedback about how those trees did. And I think that having those quality standards in a contract and then having to describe whether or not the tree has met those quality standards can really help close that loop.
Do you have a sense how hard, we're going to segue a little into bare root nurseries. Do you have a sense how difficult it is for a nursery that's growing conventional balled and burlap, wire baskets, tree spades, that thing, to convert over to bare root, maybe to fulfill a contract? Has that ever come up? I've seen some of the equipment that the bare root nurseries use, and any sense of that?
I think a major difference is that for a bare root nursery, you need significant cooling facilities, like cold storage for the trees.
Yeah.
So that's a really big infrastructure investment. I think if they were trying to do just an order or two, they could probably try it out by renting a refrigerated truck.
Yeah.
That could be the shipping container that the trees go in. And just be parked in the nursery for a bit of time. I don't know how cost effective all these ideas are.
I was just going to say that, in the cut flower industry, because I used to be a florist too, and the cut floral industry always seems to be like 20 to 30 years ahead of all the other industries. It's because they have to deliver a product to the market that is high quality, that is like the best in the market. And dry packed, hydrocooled has been used for almost 40, 50 years, and seat belted into a container so that the same thing could be done with trees, where they're barred into a box where they're hydrocooled and they have packets in there. And this is the way all fresh cut flowers come in, and they're even more perishable than a tree is. So we could actually use those same kind of methodologies for trees and be able to deliver millions of trees the same way they do millions of flowers every day, every year. And I don't think that crossover comes in our horticulture professions, where we have people that are growing cut flowers how could they be similar to a tree grower? Or many of them pull the whole plant out by the root and then just cut it off before it goes into the box. But they could keep that root. And so thinking of, trees, we could do trees that way.
Yeah. And also thinking about other industries and what even possibilities there could be to share facilities.
That's exactly right.
If a bare root tree grower is lifting their seedlings in the fall and in the spring, what's happening to that cooler the whole rest of the year, and who else could be using it and sharing that, renting that space, generating income. So the coolering is an important thing to consider when converting to bare root production. Definitely equipment. And I think it depends on the choices that growers want to make. I love at Schichtel's nursery, their device to shake trees out of the ground is just a homemade extension to a regular bobcat, a forklift that they already would have in a nursery setting, and then manufacturing their own kind of basket that scoops out under the tree and shakes it. And you've got one person holding the stem of the tree so it doesn't fall over while the soil is being shaken off. It's really fun to watch.
What's their soil like up there at Schichtel's?
So that's the big thing also with converting to bare root. The Schichtel's soil is sandy and loose and gravelly and just perfect for bare root.
Right.
You wouldn't be able to just convert to bare root if you have a more clayey soil that's going to be clods kind of sticking to the roots. How we've talked about how cool it would be to have in like the sandy soils of New Jersey, a bare root nursery close to the Philly area, just continuing to put that energy out into the universe in a wishful way.
What does Schichtel's have for storage once the trees are up?
Yeah, they have, really massive cooling barns.
Oh,
And
okay.
they've got, yeah. So like an entire facility that the entire thing is cooled, and they've got it sectioned off with kind of wooden carrels where like each order will be stacked. It's a really impressive facility.
Hydrocooling is very special because you have to extract the hot air out while you're cooling down. And I know that with plants and with fresh cut flowers, the same thing where you have to pull it out and cool it down really, really quick. And the quicker you can do it, the higher quality the product is. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking here, when you're talking about, I want to give a shout out to Octoreros because we were visiting them. I'm not sure if you've been to Octoreros, but Octoreros was just bought out by a former student of mine, Kevin Seiderlead, and his wife. And they have sand beds. So what's to say that we have to grow in soil? Why can't we be growing in gravel? Why can't we be growing in sand beds and have a very loose soil to begin with so that we know that they're only going to get to be so big before they get pulled? So we could actually pull them out. We can pull them out much earlier or shift them over to a larger particle.
One field trip I really want to do, if you guys are down to hop in the car, is I want to go to Rare Earth Nursery in Cazenovia,
that sounds very familiar.
New York. Have you heard about that one? It's an entirely gravel bed nursery.
I actually know Cazenovia really well, but I'm annoyed with myself that I never knew about the nursery. Wow.
Oh, it's cool. Why do you know Cazenovia? Or we can talk about that later.
Just my wife's family is from Fayetteville, and my mother-in-law's funeral dinner was in Cazenovia.
Oh, wow.
A little bit of tidbit for the listeners.
We're going.
Yeah.
Rare Earth Nurseries.
Yeah, so they have a Missouri gravel bed nursery, and you see the pictures of how fibrous the root systems are when they come out of the gravel bed. So at PHS, the Pennsylvania Horticultural Society, they have a very tiny gravel bed just to hold over bare roots from season to season if there's extras at the end of a planting. And so I've seen the roots that go in, and I've seen the roots that I've dug out of that small gravel bed. And it's really amazing, like how well the trees do and really put on a lot of root volume when they're in that system. I think, if you're actually growing the trees from, a whip to full size in a gravel bed, you need to think about fertilizer in a very specific way in that system. But yeah, I want to see more of it. And as I'm talking with especially cities thinking about brand new nurseries in small spaces within or near the urban centers, I'm just like letting them know, hey, this gravel bed thing exists, and it would make it so easy to pop out a tree bare root as needed with your staff or your volunteers and get it in the ground if you have like the ability to have a quick timeline about it.
Yeah, I mean, that does eliminate that one big piece of infrastructure, the cooling warehouse. If the city of Newark, Delaware, or East Orange, New Jersey,
if you're eliminating storage and transport, essentially by growing trees much closer to where they're planted.
Right.
I think for like a staff in a city who wants to plant over a longer period of time, but plant bare root, if they have them right there, they're not going to be rushed like, oh, all these bare roots are out of the ground. They just got shipped from the nursery. They're still in the ground and they can just pull them out as needed to plant. It could be pretty cool.
All you need is a hydrogel to dip them into. And that I want to tell you something. I've been using that to plant. With everything that I plant, I use hydrogel. And I want to tell you,
really,
never have a problem with anything and you never lose anything. And I did one beautiful big paper bark maple this past spring for one of my clients. And even during the drought, his tree was looking fantastic because I used the hydrogel. No problems whatsoever. Yeah, I think it's just all these little things that add up to making things much easier for people to deal with.
You presented last fall the Canopy Conference Jehane, and you had a fun topic. I felt bad for you because I think you might have been the last speaker of the day, but you really pulled the audience in. You were having a good time. We were having a good time. And the name of the talk was Rarely Planted Urban Trees. I felt sure I was going to put my hands on the notes from that talk, but I'm going to task you with maybe helping us remember a couple of the things that you were kind of upselling a little bit. And I know one of them was a tough, small oak.
Yeah, maybe I should pull up my presentation from it.
Because you do a lot of presentations.
There was a lot.
And your former colleague, Dana from PHS, is doing something similar. It's like, hey, let's look through the old copies of Michael Durr. What do we need to start looking for that has kind of fallen by the wayside? Because expanding that palette is so important. And you made a case in your talk earlier in the year on genetic diversity. So
yeah, Dana Dentiste and I are really on the same page about this question of bringing diversity into the city in Philadelphia here. And I'm glad to be able to think about this deeply in Philly, a city that I know so well. And then I hope to be a resource for people in other cities to at least step them through this process. Dana and I pulled together a meeting a few weeks before that presentation of about 30 or so practitioners in the Philly area to say, hey, like, what's on your wish list? What are the weird trees that you don't see in nurseries, but that you want to see more of on the streets of Philly? And how can we kind of strategize together to request those? And that was really fun for me to crowdsource and talk about. To crowdsource these potential trees, I used a bunch of those suggestions in this presentation to bring it to the wider audience at the Canopy conference. You were asking about a small, tough oak?
Well, it was something that you seem to be particularly fond of.
Yeah. So the live oaks are definitely dear to my heart. Those seeds that were collected by like a collaboration, it's the Morris Arboretum and the Arnold Arboretum. They collected them from Northern Virginia, like kind of the furthest north part of the live oak range, and bring them even further north to the Philly area. We're testing, are they going to survive the winter here or not? And when I was an intern at the Morris Arboretum, those trees were all the sweetest babies. And I was in charge of like the planting plan to get them out in the test nursery to see how they would survive their first few winters. And then they were, transplanted from there to different sites around the city, UPenn's campus, some out into the landscape at the Morris Arboretum. And those are all tracked. And if they do well, it's like, well, let's keep propagating them. Let's plant more live oaks here. I think of the live oak because it has such a broad stature as a park tree for sure. And so also thinking about oaks that can be more upright for at least closer to city streets or other infrastructure or buildings. The live oaks they need that grand space.
They do. And they were pretty wide already when I saw them, and they were just a lovely tree.
Yeah. And so there is also researchers working on Quercus pinus or Montana, which is the chestnut oak. And Tara Trammell at University of Delaware is working with collaborators on common garden projects, taking those chestnut oak seeds from various locations and then planting all of those different provenances or like the original source locations, planting them in each place, and then seeing how they do, those different genetics, moving them to new environments to essentially simulate what happens when we move them to a warmer environment and simulate climate change in that way. And it would be really great to see some more southern source of that oak up in the Northeast and up in the Mid-Atlantic, and be choosing a more resilient to warming version of that tree for our environment.
So much fun to talk about species. I think with few of the conferences I've been to over the last 18 months, I always feel my body relax a little bit when the screen switches over and all of a sudden we're looking at cool trees instead of graphs and data and a little bit of gloom and doom and existential angst,
Yeah.
I think that's why your talk was so well. Yeah.
That was the mandate that the conference committee gave me. They're like, well, we need at least one species talk per conference. And so it was like, please.
And that's very true. You don't realize how important that is. And maybe that's why they put you at the end too, because you kind of wrapped it up in the living, breathing part of the show.
Yeah. And, my talk was about climate change and climate adaptation. I tried to not linger too long on the doom and gloom because really my talk was almost like speculative fiction. It was about like looking to the future and saying, well, this isn't our reality yet. These trees aren't in our yards yet, but what if they were? Could they be? What would that look like? And I think that kind of vision of the future can be really exciting for people. And I will say it can also be nerve-wracking for plant people to think about big change. So I was trying to walk that line too and not be scaring people with, we're just going to willy-nilly plant whatever we want. Because, that certainly happened in Philadelphia's history. And that's why we have a lot of invasives in this country, is because of tree introductions in our area in particular.
I've got to bring this up. I read an article the other day because my son lives in California with all the burns and everything going on. And there was a street in Altadena that nothing touched it. It was like there was like a big halo around this area, and it was the halo around the trees, and the houses that were sitting next to these trees, they all survived. And it was the deodar cedar. And they said that the deodar cedar is highly fire resistant. And
Whoa,
so
cool.
this whole it's like nothing happened like to that area at all. And its nickname is called the God tree. And it's not like eucalyptus that has that sap that burns and explodes. This one here doesn't. And even the needles are very slow to burn. So the needles nothing happened. And so like you see something like that and you think to yourself, okay, there's a good example of something that is non-native that survived, that maybe not that you're going to overly plant them, but plant them in areas that are critical where fire might come through, and that could be a barrier for fire. So maybe every so many streets has that as a barrier. But that to me was really like eye-opening. It made me feel really good.
Gosh, thank you for telling me that story. Yeah, that's so cool.
Those trees are always lit up like Christmas time. They even had their Christmas lights and their boxes on, the electrical boxes on. But the week before, they shut them down because it was after Christmas, and they still had all that on them and they didn't burn.
I wonder if that's true of other cedars, like the Blue Atlas cedar or the Lebanese cedar.
It would have to be tested.
Those are some of my favorite trees.
They would have to be tested, but this particular...
That'd be so hard to test it. No.
It's funny because we couldn't grow the deodar cedar here 30 years ago. When our clients were asking for it, I said, well, if you have a protected spot, fine. But if you don't have a protected spot, you can't grow it. And then all of a sudden, with our change in growing zones, we can grow it here without any problem in the middle of a field. And it does well. And you start to look at that and you start to gather data that way. But things are happening so fast that it's hard to do all those experiments and get all that information out there. That's the other thing.
Yeah. And that's one thing that I'm trying to wrap my head around with some other folks at the Forest Service, especially with assisted migration. There's people trying stuff everywhere, either informally or through a formal research experiment. How do we actually understand the sum total of all those little tests and produce recommendations to say, like, yes, it is actually okay to plant this here now? And we're talking about also for urban trees, thinking about drought tolerance. There's differing information on the drought tolerance of a particular tree. And it might just be someone in a book, 40 years ago said, this tree is good and drought tolerant. And then that's just been carried forward from book to book till now. And it's like, well, drought tolerant for what climate? For, what area of the world are we even talking about? And what other factors? And what does drought tolerant even mean? Like, up to like how little water can they take? And so we're talking about what metrics are actually standardizable for that. A researcher that I really respect is Henry Kerman, who works in Sweden. And he does physiological tests on trees to look at their leaf turgor loss. So one of his papers that really blows my mind, he did the leaf turgor loss, which is essentially the point at which you take out water and the leaf wilts, it loses turgor. And so the graph shows for all of these different maples and maple cultivars, like a rank order of which ones wilt first and which ones wilt last. And so we can say like, okay, like are these top third? Is that what we would call drought tolerant? Or can we just look at this graph and say like, if I'm choosing between these two maples, maybe I should choose this one that takes a lot longer to wilt. And we can show that that's a good metric for it, how it actually performs in the landscape. Yeah, so I think really looking at the characteristics of trees on that physiological level, but also the tests of we're trying it everywhere. Where is it actually working? And how do we get those word of mouth stories to be decisive?
I have a student who shared a thing on Facebook, former student, and he lives up in central Pennsylvania, and he is living on the property that his family owned for close to 200 years. And they have chestnut trees, and he goes and scouts for chestnut trees all over, asking for permission, obviously, but all the way up and down the New England area and northern PA. And he has galvanized a collection that you can't believe. It's like all different types of chestnuts. And he's looking to find things that are resistant. But he also is experimenting with swamp honey locust, which I've never even heard of. And he said, oh, swamp honey locust is rare. Nobody even knows about it. And I'm working with it to see how we can get that out in the industry. And I was like, whoa, okay, that's a really good one. But there's a lot of people out there who are just doing it for fun. They're just doing it for a hobby. And those are the kind of people you hope that you can tap to get information from.
Yeah, and I think that's especially true with the nut growers and the food foresters. They're so excited, and I like the enthusiasm is amazing. And to be able to take that enthusiasm that people have because food is so exciting.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
There's just been decades of people planting different nut crops in different places to see how it'll do in different genotypes. I just Googled the swamp honey locust, Gladitia aquatica. I'm definitely going to read more about that.
So there you go. There's another tree.
Yeah, now that I think of it, you mentioned the nut growing organization, and that got a few laughs from the audience. But I have to tell you, I'm all in with chestnuts. Take me to a happy place. It might be the next Prozac. I don't know, but it even knows that. What's that?
I know that you got some chestnuts. Did you give all of them away to friends, or did you keep some for yourself to grow?
I have about 20 that I've offered to the local Roxborough, Manayunk, Wissahickon tree tender group, and I've only gotten one taker.
Okay.
But the bigger success story was just for the first time in my life having a successful roast. And I can't tell you how happy it made me to see, like on the roasting pan, all 20 blast open and so that they'd be easily pickable. I've had so much sorrow, heartache, and failure from grocery store chestnuts over the years. Wasted lots of money. But then Rick from Castanea Farms hooked me up, made an overly long drive out to Berks County to pick them up. But it was well worth it. And I could go on and on about chestnuts taking me to a happy place.
Yay.
Maybe that was a happy food.
It is, yeah. And it is. It's an instant healthy carb.
Pine nuts are for some people.
Exactly. Yes, for my Tregan diet. Jehane, do you have a favorite tree? You've circulated through hundreds of species in your lifetime already. What's the tree that calls your name and that you resonate with?
Sure. So obviously I get asked that question a lot.
Yeah.
So, I love so many, but my favorite is the Lebanese cedar, and that's an important tree for me. It's my family and cultural history, and Lebanese on one side of the family. I have been growing these little Lebanese cedars since I was an intern at the Arnold Arboretum. I was weeding under a tree one day and noticed all these little inch-tall seedlings. So I know the mother tree. I actually went to visit her this year, said hi. And of the seedlings I started with, 2 are alive. A dozen years later, I planted one at my dad's house and it's doing amazingly. It's just so happy to have real rooting room right now. Shot up. And then the other one I'm keeping in a root maker pot. And I feel bad because I'm essentially bonsaiing it right now because it would love to grow more, but I am kind of keeping it for once I have a forever home, once I kind of feel settled down, I want to plant it where I live.
Fantastic.
I think that's fantastic.
Yeah.
I knew you were going to say that. I just knew you were going to say that. Olga, I think the cedars have a special place in my heart too, because they have an amazing statue to themselves and a stature that is very magical, I think. That's my own personal opinion.
Yeah. And, the Lebanese cedar, it's on the flag of Lebanon. And whenever I go to a grocery store, if I see that little cedar tree, it just makes me happy. My orange blossom water or whatever I'm buying. And I also wrote a big paper about them in my environmental history class in college and kind of dug into all the different, the Epic of Gilgamesh mentions Lebanese cedars. They talk about Lebanese cedars being brought to Egypt to make temple doors because those were, the largest trees around to have a wide enough door. It's just really cool to picture that landscape of Phoenicia, of ancient Lebanon, so covered with those cedar trees, and then also to think about how few of them there are now, but how resilient they are, and kind of the narratives that we tell about climate change and destruction over time, and what is a climax forest and what is a degraded forest. And I just feel like I've learned a lot thinking about this tree and that cedar.
I love that.
That's a nice one, and you're the first one to talk about that one. I'm so excited.
Oh, cool. Do you ask everybody what their favorite tree is?
We do.
Okay.
And it's always so nice. Most people say the white oak, but we now have Cedrus lebani that has been discussed. Well, it's great having you on, Jehane. You have a lot of information and lots of gold nuggets that are great for all of our listeners.
Oh, thanks.
And wishing you the very best in your position.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, and I really do feel like I'm just starting out still, and there's so much more to learn and do, but really.
Well, thanks, Jehane. It's been terrific, and we wish you the best for this 2025.
Yep.
Thanks so much.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
The Planet Trillion Trees podcast is edited by Andromedan Recordings in Hollywood, California.